They deliberately spilled wine on her, but the Duke of Graftonwood stood in the shadows watching silently. Ah, do not be fooled by Lord Travis's stillness, my beloved listener. The wine, the mockery, the cruelty, all of it awakens a storm he keeps hidden behind calm eyes. Gisella may be but a maid in their sight, yet tonight society will learn a delicious lesson. The quietest protector often holds the sharpest power. And when that storm finally breaks, dearest listener, the cruel will wish they had never dared spill a single drop of wine. Allow me to satisfy your curiosity. I am Lady Whistledown, chronicler of high society's triumphs and keeper of its most delicious disgraces. I watch, I listen, and then I write. Do subscribe, so you don't miss my gossips. And tell us where you are watching from, so I may see just how far my little gossip flies. Dearest gentle listener, allow me to paint for you a night dipped in starlight and sealed with scandal. The annual charity ball, that illustrious event where elegance is draped upon every shoulder and virtue is paraded like a prized jewel, should have been nothing short of divine. The chandeliers shivered with golden promise, violins spun melodies as soft as sighs, and pearls glittered like moonlight captured in glass. Yet beneath all that shine lurked something sour. Perhaps it was inevitable. Whenever new money attempts to strut among ancient bloodlines, arrogance tends to trail behind like cheap perfume. Enter the Jordan family. Levi Jordan, heir to a fortune earned not by legacy but contracts and conquest, believed his place among dukes and viscounts assured. He strutted into the ballroom like a man convinced that a tailor's needle could sew nobility directly into his sleeves. His laughter was loud, his manners absent, and his ego. My, what a colossal creature that was. At the centre of the swirling ballroom stood Duchess Gisella of Graftonwood, a vision in soft rose silk, her beauty made sharper by humility, a diamond without the need for light. You must understand, dear listener, she was not born a duchess. Before the vows that bound her heart to a noble one, she had belonged to service, a maid polishing silver and floors, not dancing beneath chandeliers. Many forgot that nobility of the soul outweighs the pedigree of birth, but envy, I fear, never forgets. The first whisper arrived before the first waltz even ended. They say she cannot even curtsy properly. A duchess with servants' calluses, can you imagine? Her husband must have rescued her from the scullery like a stray kitten. Those whispers swirled like a cold wind, hoping to reach her ears, hoping to sting. Oh, but Levi Jordan was not satisfied with whispers. Cruelty, you see, requires applause. He approached her with an exaggerated bow, wine sloshing dangerously in his goblet. Duchess Gisella, ever gracious, gave him a polite nod. Unaware, she stared into the eyes of a boy dressed as a man. How fortunate the Duke found room in his heart for charity beyond the ball, he sneered, voice sugar-coated poison. Gisella's brows knit, confusion softening her features. She began to reply, gentle as morning light, but Levi the brute tipped his glass. The red wine cascaded down her bodice in a crimson river, soaking silk, staining innocence, a splash of violence against her dignity. Gasps erupted. Fans snapped open like startled birds, painted lips curled in wicked delight. Oh, how society adores a scandal, provided they are not the ones bleeding in it. And then the words. Once a maid, Levi taunted, voice loud enough for every ear. Always a maid. Her breath caught, her cheeks flushed. Not from anger, from mortification. It was the humiliation that stings deeper than any lash. Her trembling fingers fought to hide the shake in her heart. What of her husband, you ask? The Duke of Graftonwood, Travis, the man whose kindness was whispered as weakness, stood mere steps away. Every noble eye darted toward him like watching hounds, hungry for reaction. Surely now he would roar. Surely now the lamb would show fangs. Ah, but the good Duke remained still as carved marble, his expression unreadable, his silence deafening, his restraint mistaken. A man too gentle to defend his wife, one lady murmured behind a jewelled fan, voice dripping smug delight. Or too ashamed of her, another whispered with cruel hope. Rare is the heart that recognizes quiet power, for while his hands did not clench, his eyes— oh, those eyes! They gleamed with something feral beneath civility, a storm suppressed, a blade sheathed. Levi Jordan laughed, too loudly, too freely, mistaking silence for surrender. He turned his back to the Duchess, offering her shame as his farewell. Gisela stood alone in that ocean of polished marble and polished cruelty. The wine soaking into her gown felt suddenly cold. Her vision blurred, not from tears, for she would not grant them the satisfaction, but from the ache of remembering too well where she came from. The scent of grapes and mockery clung to her like chains. The musicians faltered, boughs hovering uncertainly. Even the candles seemed to flicker in disapproval. Scandal has a way of drawing breath from a room. Then, a hand appeared. The Duke's. He offered it without theatrics. No wrathful declaration, no raised voice, just a simple, steady gesture, reverent and unwavering. Gisela stared at that hand, a lifeline, a vow renewed without a single word spoken. Slowly she placed her trembling fingers into his palm. He lifted her chin, gentle, yes, but with authority that commanded silence across the ballroom. "Walk with me," he murmured, only for her ears. Not a rescue, a recrowning. As they moved through the crowd, nobles parted like the sea before them. Some averted their gaze, shame catching up with belated conscience. Others glared with venomous disappointment that the spectacle had ended too soon. But Lady Whistledown watches everything, and I saw the way Levi's cocky grin faltered. I saw the seed of dread take root when he finally noticed the danger lurking in the Duke's calm. His laughter choked off, his gaze darted like prey sensing the predator too late. Kindness, dear listener, is a double-edged virtue. When wielded by the powerful, it is mistaken for meekness. When trampled upon, it rises sharper than justice. The Duke's silence tonight was not surrender. It was a promise that humiliation once spilled does not evaporate. It echoes, and once that echo reaches the right ears, retribution begins. So I ask you now, not merely as a narrator of scandal, but as a confidant of the heart. Tell me, dear viewer, have you ever been underestimated because you were kind? Mark my words. Those who mistake gentleness for weakness are destined to learn the most unforgettable lessons, and Levi Jordan's education has only just begun. Ah, love, that audacious, rebellious creature, forever choosing the most inconvenient hearts to conquer. And in this tale, it chose a maid with calloused hands and a duke who had the audacity to believe titles were merely costumes society wore to feel important. Let us begin with Gisela. For without her, none of this scandal would matter. Gisela was not born beneath chandeliers, nor welcomed into salons where gossip drips sweeter than honey. No, she came from kitchens where steam clouded the air, where the scent of fresh bread clung to her like memory. Her first lullabies were the clatter of pots and the soft curses of overworked women who stitched dignity into every breath. She scrubbed floors polished enough to see her reflection, though she rarely looked, for she feared she would only see what the world insisted she was, common, small, invisible. But I assure you she was anything but. Even before love found her, Gisela carried herself like someone who knew her worth, even if society denied it. She listened more than she spoke. She saw more than people realized. Her silence held stories far richer than the laughter of any viscount's daughter. Then there was Travis. Yes, that Travis, the Duke whose name was whispered like a legend and cursed like a warning. A man who wielded mercy as though it were a weapon sharper than any blade. A man whose kindness made enemies faster than cruelty ever could. For in the tone, nothing unsettles quite like a powerful man who refuses to be cruel. He earned his reputation not by domination, but by defiance. When other dukes demanded obedience, Travis offered forgiveness. When nobles sought to remind the world of their superiority, Travis looked directly into the eyes of those forgotten and treated them as equals. Society hates what it cannot control. Which brings us to their marriage, the grand whisper that still warms cheeks and tightens corsets across London. They met in the simplest of places, one of those unlikely corners of life where fate lurks, bored and looking for amusement. He entered a hall seeking solitude. She entered seeking escape. He noticed the way her fingers trembled, though her face remained composed. She noticed the weariness beneath his noble posture, a loneliness fame could not hide, and thus began a most tender rebellion. Servants adored her in an instant. Imagine, a duchess who remembered their names, who knelt beside them to help scrub a stain, who laughed in the laundry room with sleeves rolled up like any of them. She brought pastries to the night staff and blankets to the maids who slept in unheated rooms. She never forgot where she came from, nor did she allow anyone else to forget the humanity of those who served. Nobles, on the other hand. Oh, their envy burned hotter than the coals beneath the Dowager Countess's tea kettle. A duke may marry whomever he likes, in theory. But in practice? A maid? They clutched their pearls, gasped dramatically, and whispered venom behind lacquered fans. She must have trapped him, they hissed. She must be hiding something, they accused. She must be lying about who she truly is, they decided, because the truth, that love had simply chosen her, was too unacceptable. For what does it say about birthright if grace and devotion trump wealth and pedigree? What does it say about the ton, if a girl from the kitchens can be more noble than those dripping in jewels? Their union challenged everything, and the ton does not take kindly to being challenged, especially not by a woman who makes a duke happy. Now, allow me to reveal a scandalous certainty. Envy sharpens itself into malice. The newly fortunate, those intoxicated by sudden wealth and desperate for validation, were the first to strike. New money always claws hardest at old grace. They saw Gisela not as a duchess to respect, but as an obstacle to be removed, a reminder that they too could lose everything if rank were measured by character rather than coin. They whispered that Gisela could never truly belong. They laughed that she still curtsied too deeply. They sneered that her hands, though gloved, bore the memory of labour, but the most dangerous cruelty came masked in friendship. There were ladies who praised her humility while plotting to humiliate her. Lords who toasted her beauty while wondering what she would fetch if sold at auction. Invitations came coated in honey, while traps waited beneath the lace-draped tables. And though Travis warned her of society's venom, Gisela refused to cage herself in privilege. She walked among both worlds, the grand and the humble, not knowing that eyes followed her everywhere, waiting for a misstep they could turn into a scandal. Every triumph of hers, every bit of joy she dared to claim, only tightened the jaws of those hungry to see her fall. Yet still, Gisela loved. She loved her husband in the quiet hours before dawn, when titles melted and he was simply the man who held her as if she were priceless. She loved him when he returned from Parliament with weariness on his brow, and she brewed tea with her own hands rather than ringing for a servant. She loved him fiercely, with a loyalty that shamed even those born to it. And Travis? His love was a shield. One word from him could silence a room. One glare could turn arrogance to ash. They said he would grow bored, that novelty fades, that romance cannot survive in the shadows of velvet walls. But their love only deepened, unfazed by silk or scandal. His confidence in her was not delicate, nor was it conditional. He did not choose her because she made him appear noble. He chose her because she made him human. And therein lies the greatest threat of all. A love built not on convenience or alliance, but on devotion. But do not mistake this serenity for safety. For beneath the polished floors of London's aristocracy, resentment coils like a snake. It watches, it waits. And as recent events at Harrogate House have proven, some will strike with wine, others with whispers. and a select few will strike to ruin completely. Remember this name, dear listeners, Gisela, the maid who became a duchess. They will try to tarnish her. They will try to break her. They will try to drag her back to the shadows where they believe she belongs. Yet love makes warriors of the gentle, and secrets, oh the secrets, make conquerors of the underestimated. I shall keep my quill poised, for the true battle has only just begun. Behind velvet curtains and polished champagne flutes, cruelty dressed itself as humour among the Jordans. Levi Jordan, with his smug grin and careless posture, seemed to believe that wealth entitled him to wield humiliation like a toy. His father, Spencer Jordan, watched with indulgent amusement, as though the spilled wine upon Duchess Gisela's gown were nothing more than an entertaining accident. But I, Lady Whistledown, take note of every stain on silk, for such stains often seep into the fabric of reputation. The Duke of Graftonwood stood across the room, one hand gently curled around his cane, eyes calm as an undisturbed lake. Travis was a mystery to the ton, that rare noble who refused to sneer downward. A man whose voice seldom raised, whose fury seldom flared. And so, those who lived loudly assumed him powerless. The Jordan whispers, however, told a different story. He is too soft. He lacks the spine of proper nobility. A lamb pretending he belongs in the den of lions. The laughter rattled champagne glasses. Spencer lifted his brows in challenge. "Tell me, Levi," he murmured, swirling brandy as though it were only justice. "Do you think the Duke will dare object to what occurred?" Levi scoffed. He did not even move. Perhaps he is grateful that someone else reminds his wife of where she came from. A few standing too near gasped, though more smirked behind their masks of civility. How amusing that the wealthy so frequently measure courage by the volume of one's voice. The ballroom glimmered beneath chandeliers, yet Gisela felt no brilliance touch her heart. The deep red stain spread across her gown like a wound, one born not from wine but from pride and cruelty. She lowered her head, shoulders tight with the strain of quiet suffering. "Gisela." Travis spoke softly as he approached her. The single word wrapped her like a cloak, protective, grounding. But she forced a smile. "It is just a dress," she whispered. "Nothing worth attention." "Everything about you is worth attention," he replied. Though the words were tender, his jaw had turned to granite. Spencer's laughter carried again, loudly, too loud, as if challenging the Duke to hear, and he did. Travis was not a man easily provoked, yet every snicker chipped away at the marble calm he wore, revealing the steel beneath. But what is steel without intent? He lifted Gisela's chin. "Do you wish to leave?" Her voice quivered. "If we leave now, they will say we fled because we were ashamed." "Then we shall not leave," he answered, eyes locked on the pair who revelled in their mockery. Envy, I have learned, rarely remains silent. It festers. It hunts. Spencer approached them then, all smiles and venom, with Levi trailing behind like a pup who believed himself a wolf. "My dear Duchess," Spencer purred with false sympathy. "What an unfortunate spill. One might think fate wished to remind us all that nobility cannot be washed into someone." The line struck like a slap. Levi snickered under his breath. Travis straightened, tall, imposing, princely even without a crown. "And one might think," he replied, voice like velvet over a blade, "that true nobility lies in conduct, not birthright." A flicker, just a flicker of warning crossed Spencer's features. But Levi? He smirked. Unteachable, unyielding. "Conduct," Levi said. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but some standards are simply too high for those who once scrubbed floors." Gisela inhaled sharply, the memory of harsh soap and aching knees returning in an instant. She clung to Grace, refusing to grant Levi the satisfaction of seeing her break. Travis placed a hand over hers, a silent promise. The music swelled but failed to smooth the jagged tension threading the room. "You display your ignorance loudly, Mr. Jordan," the Duke murmured. "Perhaps one day you will learn to wield power without cruelty." "Cruelty?" Levi echoed. "Is that what you believe this is?" "No. This is simply order. Every creature belongs in its rightful place." "And yet," I noted quietly to you, listener, he speaks without noticing how very low his own words have fallen. Spencer's patience thinned. "We would not wish to cause offence," he said insincerely. "After all, your Grace has always championed mercy above consequence." Mercy. A word he spoke like an insult. A word Travis had chosen as his creed. A word the Ton misunderstood entirely. For mercy, real mercy, is a choice made by those who possess the power to destroy. Travis smiled then, a calm, chilly smile. "You misunderstand me, Mr. Jordan. Mercy is not the absence of strength. It is its proof." He offered no spectacle, no raised voice, but the warning had been issued. Yet Levi, blind to the shifting tide, dared grin wider. "We shall see," he scoffed. Oh, how little they realized they already had. Dearest gentle listener, I, Lady Whistledown, have long maintained that vengeance, when wielded by those of true refinement, requires neither thunder nor spectacle. It does not announce itself with raised voices or dramatic confrontations in drawing rooms. No, the most devastating justice arrives on silent feet, dressed in inevitability, patient as winter's first snow. And the Duke of Graftonwood, it seemed, had perfected this particular art. It began with shipments. Crates destined for Jordan warehouses found themselves delayed at the docks. Curious complications with documentation, one clerk explained. Stamps missing. Signatures questioned. The sort of tedious bureaucratic entanglements that had never once troubled the Jordan family in 3 generations of trade. Yet now, somehow, every cargo sat stalled while harbour masters consulted endless ledgers and shook their heads with apologetic shrugs. Then came the investors. Men who had dined at Spencer Jordan's table for decades, who had laughed at his jests and nodded at his schemes, suddenly discovered pressing business elsewhere. Letters went unanswered, appointments cancelled with the flimsiest of excuses. One by one, the pillars supporting Jordan prosperity found reasons to step quietly away, to Bath, to Scotland, to any corner of England that offered distance from a family whose fortunes had begun to smell of rot. And finally, the workers. The very men who had loaded those delayed crates, who had tallied ledgers and swept warehouses, began to vanish like morning mist. They left no angry declarations, no dramatic resignations. They simply accepted better positions, positions that, curiously, all seemed to bear the quiet endorsement of a certain duke whose influence stretched further than anyone had quite realized. The Jordan's empire, built not on innovation but on arrogance, not on merit but on borrowed prestige and the cruel pleasure of standing atop those they deemed inferior, began to crumble. I confess, there is a particular poetry in watching hubris meet its reckoning. Spencer Jordan paced his study like a caged wolf, barking orders at clerks who returned empty-handed, their explanations tangled in bureaucracy that seemed to multiply overnight. His handsome face twisted into something ugly with frustration. He threw money at problems that refused to be solved, called in favours that went unreturned, demanded explanations that no one could provide. Because the Duke's retaliation was not a storm, it was erosion. Patient. Inevitable. Impossible to fight because there was nothing to strike back against, no enemy to face. Only the slow, suffocating realization that the world had shifted beneath Jordan's feet, and no amount of shouting would restore the ground they'd lost. But here is where our tale grows deliciously complex. For while Spencer crumbled in private, Travis Graftonwood remained the very portrait of grace in public. When their paths crossed at the Thistleton ball, the Duke greeted Spencer Jordan with courtesy so flawless it could have been carved from marble. His bow was precise to the exact degree, his smile softer than velvet, pleasant as a spring morning, betraying nothing of the architect of ruin standing before the ruins themselves. "Lord Jordan," Travis murmured, his voice carrying that particular warmth reserved for old acquaintances. "How well you look this evening." Spencer's jaw tightened. I noted the muscle jumping beneath his skin, the way his fingers curled around his glass until his knuckles whitened. "Your Grace." The title scraped his throat like glass. "I trust business finds you well?" The Duke's inquiry floated between them, innocent as a dove, deadly as arsenic. "Well enough," Spencer managed. "Splendid news." Travis's gaze, that gaze, held Spencer's for precisely 3 seconds. Long enough to deliver a message, short enough to maintain perfect deniability. Sharp as daggers hidden in silk, the smile never wavered. The voice never hardened. But Spencer Jordan, for perhaps the first time in his privileged existence, understood what it meant to face an opponent who fought without ever raising his fist, who destroyed without ever breaking decorum. I watched from across the ballroom as the exchange concluded with all the civility of a garden party conversation. No one else would have seen the war being waged in pleasantries. No one else would have recognized the exquisite torture of being dismantled by a man who refused you even the dignity of open enmity. But someone else did see. Gisela Graftonwood stood at the periphery of her husband's triumph, a vision in sapphire silk that should have drawn every eye. Yet she watched only one man, her husband, the Duke whose protection had saved her, whose love had redeemed her, whose capacity for calculated destruction she was only beginning to comprehend. She had believed she knew him, the gentle suitor who had courted her with poetry and patience, the champion who had defended her honour with unflinching courage. But this man, this Duke who dismantled enemies with the same grace he used to waltz, who smiled while kingdoms crumbled at his feet, this was someone she was only now truly seeing. Gisela observed her husband's calm turning colder with each passing day. Not toward her, never toward her. His eyes still softened when they met hers. His touch remained tender, his devotion unchanged. But elsewhere, in his study, in his correspondence, in the way he held himself among society, winter had settled into his bones. His secrets, like his love, ran deep. And Gisela found herself wondering, as she watched him exchange pleasantries with the man he was methodically destroying, not what her husband was capable of, but what he had already done. For her, because of her, in her name. Desperation, I have observed, wears many masks. On some it appears as rage, on others panic. But on Spencer Jordan, desperation wore the face of a man who had finally realised that his name, once a shield against consequence, had become worthless parchment in a storm. He sought Parliament's assistance. I watched him climb those hallowed steps with the grim determination of a man marching toward salvation. He carried letters of introduction, reminders of family connections spanning generations, promises of future favour. He invoked old alliances, reminded powerful men of debts unpaid, spoke of injustices requiring remedy, and one by one doors slammed shut, not dramatically, not with speeches or declarations, simply closed. Politely even, with regrets and sympathetic murmurs, with vague references to unfortunate timing and pressing prior commitments. The very men who had once courted Jordan favour now found themselves unable to recall his name. It was, I confess, a masterpiece of social annihilation. London's whispers turned, as whispers inevitably do, toward the truth hiding in plain sight. "Is the Duke behind this?" they asked over morning chocolate in afternoon parlours, beneath the glittering chandeliers of evening balls. The question floated through drawing rooms like smoke, impossible to grasp yet impossible to ignore. No one possessed proof. No one could point to a single action that bore the Duke of Graftonwood's signature. Yet everyone sensed his hand in the Jordan family's spectacular unravelling. The precision of it, the thoroughness, the cold mathematics of justice being served without a single raised voice or broken rule of decorum. It had his elegance written all over it. Meanwhile, in the Jordan household, Levi Jordan, Spencer's arrogant son, a man who had spent his life coasting on his family's reputation while contributing nothing to its maintenance, trembled as fortune slipped through his fingers like water through a broken vessel. I witnessed him at Lady Ashford's garden party, his hands shaking as he lifted his wineglass, his eyes darting about as though searching for invisible predators. He had lived his entire existence as a parasite feeding on his father's success, never building anything of his own, never cultivating skills beyond spending money he hadn't earned. And now, watching that money vanish, he understood for the first time what it meant to have nothing. "They say we're ruined," he whispered to Spencer in a corner he believed private. "That we'll lose everything." Spencer's jaw tightened. Not everything. Not yet. But his voice carried no conviction, only the hollow ring of a man trying to convince himself of lies. Yet it was not at garden parties or in Parliament chambers where our tale's true revelation occurred. No, that happened in the Graftonwood residence, behind closed doors, where titles and pretense fell away, and only truth remained. Gisela confronted her husband. She found him in his study, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. The evidence of his calculated campaign spread before him like battle plans. The firelight caught the angles of his face, casting shadows that made him look harder, older, more dangerous than the gentle suitor she had married. "Travis," she said quietly. He looked up, and his expression softened instantly. That transformation she had witnessed countless times, the way winter melted into spring whenever his eyes met hers. "My love. Tell me true." She stepped closer, her silk gown whispering against the floor. "What you've done to the Jordans, is it justice, or has it become something else?" He stood, moving toward her with that grace that still made her breath catch. "What do you mean?" "I mean..." Her voice wavered, then strengthened. "I am grateful. God knows I am grateful for your protection, for your defense of my honor." But watching them crumble, seeing Spencer's desperation, his son's fear, I wonder if justice has curdled into vengeance. Travis reached for her hands, his touch gentle despite the strength in his fingers. "Do you pity them?" "I pity all who suffer, even those who deserve their suffering." She searched his face. "But my question is not about them. It is about you, about us, about whether this crusade has cost you something of yourself." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, not cold but weighted with significance. Then Travis pulled her closer, his voice dropping to that intimate register reserved only for her. "The Jordans did not merely insult you, Gisela. They sought to destroy you, to cast you into ruin for sport, for entertainment, because they believed themselves untouchable. Should I have let that stand? Should I have smiled and done nothing while they plotted your downfall?" "No," she whispered. But nothing?" His hands came up to cradle her face with infinite tenderness. "You ask if I have changed. Perhaps I have. Perhaps loving you has made me capable of ruthlessness I never knew existed within me. But understand this." He leaned his forehead against hers, his next words spoken like a vow, like prayer, like promise wrapped in warning. "For your dignity, my love. I would raise empires. I would watch kingdoms burn. I would dismantle every house, every fortune, every name that dared threaten you. Not from cruelty, but from love. Not from vengeance, but from the absolute certainty that your protection matters more than any code of mercy extended to those who showed you none." Gisela's breath caught. The firelight danced between them, casting shadows and light across the raw emotion in his face. "You frighten me," she whispered. And yet, I have never felt safer." Their kiss ignited slowly, building from tenderness into something deeper, more consuming. In the privacy of tender arms, with the world locked outside, their love burned anew, not the innocent affection of courtship, but something forged in truth and trial, in protection and promise, in the recognition that they had chosen each other knowing the depths and darkness each possessed. Built on truth, built on protection, built on a storm yet to come. Tell me, dear heart, should mercy possess limits? But before we proceed, dear listener, subscribe now, lest you miss how this delicious drama unfolds. London waits for no one, and neither does Lady Whistledown. Ruin, I have learned, does not arrive with trumpets and declarations. It stalks, it circles. It waits with the patience of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. And for the Jordans, ruin had been stalking for weeks, drawing ever closer, tightening the noose with each delayed shipment, each withdrawn investment, each worker who quietly accepted employment elsewhere. Their empire, built on arrogance rather than foundation, crumbled with the inevitability of a house constructed on sand. The bankruptcy rumours spread like wolves at their gates, whispered first in gentlemen's clubs over brandy and cigars, then murmured in ladies' parlours over tea and speculation. Finally spoken aloud at dinner parties where the Jordans were conspicuously absent, their empty chairs serving as monuments to fallen pride. I watched Spencer Jordan's face grow gaunt, his eyes hollow with sleepless nights spent poring over ledgers that refused to balance. Watched him age a decade in mere weeks, his handsome features carved into something desperate and dangerous. But it was Levi, young, foolish Levi, whose desperation took a darker turn. Cornered animals bite. And Levi Jordan, stripped of his fortune and facing a future without the comfort of unearned wealth, lashed out with the blind panic of a man watching his world collapse. He had convinced himself, in that peculiar way the guilty often do, that someone must be to blame. Not his own actions, not his family's cruelty. No, it must be an enemy, a conspirator, someone orchestrating their downfall. And he fixed his suspicions on the one person he had already marked as beneath him, Gisela, the maid who dared become a duchess, the woman whose very existence challenged everything he believed about class and worth and the natural order of things. Surely, he reasoned with twisted logic, she must be behind their misfortunes. Who else would harbour such resentment? Who else would seek revenge? How perfectly he missed the truth staring him in the face. It happened at the Hendrickson evening reception, a smaller affair, intimate enough that corridors stood empty while guests gathered in the main salon. Gisela had slipped away for a moment's peace, seeking respite from the eyes that still followed her, still judged her, still questioned her right to stand among them. She found shadow instead of solitude. Levi emerged from an alcove like something feral, his cravat loosened, his eyes bright with wine and desperation and the last dregs of his shattered pride. "You!" he hissed, seizing her wrist before she could retreat. His fingers bit into her skin with bruising force. "You've done this, turned your husband against us, poisoned him with your common grudges." Gisela's breath caught, old fears rising like ghosts. For a moment, she was not a duchess, but a maid again, powerless, voiceless, at the mercy of men who believed their station gave them rights over her very body. "Release me," she managed, her voice steadier than her racing heart. "Not until you confess." He backed her against the wall, his face too close, his breath sour with alcohol and rage. "Tell your duke to stop. Call off whatever vengeance you've set in motion. Or I swear, titles be damned, I will see you return to the gutters where you belong. Remove your hand." The voice cut through the shadowed hall like winter steel wrapped in velvet. Travis stood at the corridor's end, his figure backlit by the salon's golden glow. He did not shout, did not raise his voice above that deadly calm that somehow carried more menace than any bellow could achieve. But oh, the wrath contained in those 3 words. I have witnessed many things in my years chronicling London's elite, but I have rarely seen fury so perfectly controlled. The Duke of Graftonwood moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step measured, each movement promising violence held in check by the thinnest thread of civility. Levi released Gisela as though burned, stumbling backward, his bravado evaporating like morning dew beneath the Duke's approach. "Your Grace, I was merely—" "You were threatening my wife." Travis positioned himself between them, a wall of silk and muscle and barely contained storm. In a darkened hallway, with your hands upon her person. I meant no. What you meant is irrelevant. The Duke's voice remained soft, but winter had nothing on its chill. What you did speaks clearly enough. Gisela touched her husband's arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his sleeve. Travis. He covered her hand with his, the gesture achingly gentle even as his gaze remained fixed on Levi with predatory focus. Are you harmed, my love? No, I am well. Then Lord Levi is fortunate. Travis's smile would have frozen hell itself. This time, Levi opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to apologize, but something in the Duke's expression silenced him. He fled instead, his footsteps echoing his retreat like the scurrying of rats from a sinking ship. The Jordans believed, in their desperation and delusion, that they had escaped consequences, that their crimes would fade into London's endless catalogue of scandals, forgotten as newer outrages captured society's fickle attention. Oh, gentle listeners, how mistaken they were. 2 days later, a summons arrived at the Jordan residence. Heavy parchment, impeccable calligraphy. Sealed with crimson wax bearing the Grafton Wood crest, a lion rampant, appropriate for a duke who had finally shown his claws. The message was brief. Your presence is required at Grafton Wood House 3 days hence. Attendance is not optional. Wear your finest. You will need your dignity for what comes next. Spencer's hands trembled as he read the words. Levi went pale as parchment itself. Their judgment day had come, and I, Lady Whistledown, would not miss it for all the scandal sheets in Christendom. There is a particular symmetry to justice I have found, when it is served in the very place where injury was first delivered. The same ballroom, the same crystal chandeliers casting their golden light across polished marble. The same nobles who had witnessed Gisela's humiliation now gathered once more, their curiosity piqued by whispered rumours of something extraordinary about to unfold. Lady Pemberton's autumn gala, the very stage where Levi Jordan had spilled wine upon a duchess and called her a maid, where laughter had rippled through the crowd like poison, where Travis Graftonwood had been deemed too merciful, too weak to defend his own wife. How fitting that it should be here, in this glittering arena of judgment, that mercy would demand an audience. I positioned myself near the grand staircase, the better to observe every nuance, every flicker of emotion that would surely paint itself across London's most distinguished faces. The air hummed with anticipation. Something was coming. Everyone sensed it, though none could name it. The Duke of Graftonwood arrived precisely at 9, his presence commanding immediate attention despite his unhurried pace. He wore midnight blue, elegant, understated, devastating in its simplicity. Beside him walked Gisela, radiant in silver silk that caught the candlelight like captured starshine, her head held high, her hand resting gently upon her husband's arm. They looked, I must say, like sovereignty itself, but it was the figures trailing behind them that drew gasps. Spencer Jordan, Levi Jordan, both dressed in their finest, as commanded, yet wearing their finery like funeral shrouds. Spencer's face bore the haggard look of a man who had not slept peacefully in weeks. Levi's usual swagger had collapsed entirely, leaving behind only a young man who suddenly understood how small he truly was. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow, as the Duke led his strange procession to the centre of the ballroom. The orchestra fell silent mid-phrase. Conversations died on painted lips. Every eye fixed upon the scene unfolding before them. Travis released his wife's hand with infinite gentleness, guiding her to stand slightly apart, witness rather than participant in what was to come. Then he turned to face the assembled nobility, his expression serene, his voice carrying effortlessly through the sudden hush. "My lords and ladies," he began, "I thank you for bearing witness this evening. What transpires here concerns not merely my house, but the very principles upon which civil society rests, namely, respect, dignity, and the consequences of forgetting both. Spencer Jordan's jaw tightened. Levi stared at the floor as though memorizing the pattern in the marble. Some weeks passed, Travis continued, his tone remaining conversational, almost gentle. In this very ballroom, my wife, the Duchess of Graftonwood, was subjected to deliberate humiliation. Wine was spilled upon her gown. Insults were delivered with the casual cruelty afforded by those who believe their station grants them immunity from consequence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several nobles who had laughed that night now found sudden interest in their shoes. I was called merciful that evening. Too merciful, some whispered, to properly defend my wife's honour. The Duke's smile held no warmth. Perhaps they mistook mercy for weakness. Perhaps they believed kindness indicated an absence of strength. Allow me, then, to correct this misunderstanding. He gestured, and Spencer Jordan stepped forward as though pulled by invisible strings. Lord Spencer Jordan, you permitted your son's behaviour. You laughed when he called my wife a maid, as though her previous station diminished her current worth, as though service was something shameful rather than honourable. Spencer's face flushed crimson. Your Grace, You will speak when given leave. The Duke's voice remained soft, but the command in it brooked no argument. You have 3 acts to perform this evening, 3 offerings toward redemption, if such a thing remains possible for your house. The ballroom held its collective breath. First, Travis announced, his voice ringing clear, you will offer a full and public apology to Duchess Gisela. Not the empty platitudes practiced before mirrors, but genuine acknowledgement of the harm inflicted. You will name your offences. You will express genuine remorse. And you will do so before every witness gathered here. Spencer's throat worked. His eyes darted to Gisela, who stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Second, the Duke continued, you will donate a sum of £50,000 to the establishment of schools and apprenticeships for London's working class, those very people you and your son treated with such contempt. Let your coin serve those you scorned. Perhaps it will teach you what your privilege failed to, that worth is not measured in bloodlines alone. Gasps fluttered through the assembly like wings. £50,000, a fortune that would cripple an already wounded house. And third, Travis turned his gaze upon Levi, who visibly flinched. Your son will serve 6 months at Graftonwood Estate, labouring alongside the servants he deemed beneath him. He will rise with them, work with them, eat with them, and learn what it means to earn respect rather than demand it through birth alone. The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared breathe, no one moved. The pronouncement hung in the air like a blade suspended above every noble head in attendance, a reminder that power wielded with restraint proved the sharpest weapon of all. Spencer's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Your Grace, this is justice, Travis finished quietly. Measured and merciful. You could have faced far worse. I could have destroyed your house entirely, scattered your name to history's forgotten corners. Instead, I offer you redemption. The question is whether you possess sufficient humility to accept it. Spencer Jordan looked at his son, looked at the assembled nobles, looked finally at Gisela, the woman he had allowed to be mocked, the Duchess whose dignity he had trampled for sport. Then, slowly, he bowed his head. I accept your terms, Your Grace. All of them. The apology that followed was halting, imperfect but genuine in its shame. Levi's face burned with humiliation as his sentence was sealed before London's elite. But it was done. No one would mock the merciful Duke again. They had learned at last that mercy and weakness were not synonyms, and that Travis Graftonwood's kindness concealed steel sharp enough to reshape the world. The veil, as they say, had finally lifted. London knew, not through proclamation or confession, but through the accumulated weight of evidence too precise to be coincidence, too elegant to be anything but design. The Duke of Graftonwood had orchestrated the Jordan family's downfall with the methodical grace of a master strategist. and everyone, from the highest lord to the humblest servant, recognized his hand in their humbling, and rather than condemn him, society marveled. I watched the transformation ripple through ballrooms and gentlemen's clubs, through afternoon teas and evening soirees. The whispers that had questioned Travis's strength now spoke of his brilliance. The nobles who had deemed him too merciful now understood that mercy wielded with intention was the most devastating force of all. He had not merely defended his wife, he had rewritten the rules of power itself. But it was at Grafton Wood Estate, far from London's glittering spectacle, where the true resolution of our tale unfolded. Among miners and smiths, Levi Jordan learned what his gilded upbringing had never taught him. I confess, I made the journey to witness it myself. This transformation of a spoiled lordling into something resembling a man. What I found surprised even my cynical heart. Levi rose before dawn with the other labourers, his fine hands blistered and raw from work he had never imagined himself capable of performing. He hauled coal. He worked the forge. He learned that dignity was not inherited through bloodlines but earned through sweat, through contribution, through the simple act of standing beside others rather than above them. The workers, those souls he had once scorned as beneath his notice, treated him with a rough fairness that was itself a form of mercy. They did not coddle him, but neither did they crush him. They simply expected him to work, to learn, to prove himself worthy of the space he occupied. And slowly, painfully, he did. I watched him one afternoon in the forge, his face smudged with soot, his movements careful as he learned to shape heated metal under the patient instruction of a blacksmith named Thomas, a man whose calloused hands had built more of value than Levi's entire family had contributed in 3 generations. "Like this, lad," Thomas corrected gently, adjusting Levi's grip. "The metal teaches you respect, see? Force it too hard, it breaks. Treat it right, it becomes something beautiful." The metaphor was not lost on Levi, whose eyes held a humility that had been entirely absent weeks before. This, I realized, was the Duke's true genius, not destruction, but reconstruction, not vengeance, but education delivered through consequence. Meanwhile, in London proper, another transformation had taken root. Gisela, the once scorned maid who had dared become a duchess, now commanded admiration from every corner of society. The very nobles who had questioned her worth, who had whispered about her common origins behind gloved hands, now sought her favour with an enthusiasm that bordered on desperation. She moved through ballrooms like royalty born rather than made, her grace impossible to deny, her kindness legendary among both aristocracy and working class. Invitations to her salons were coveted like jewels. Her opinion on matters of fashion and charity carried weight that made even the most established duchesses jealous. But it was not merely society's approval that had transformed her. It was something deeper, something that bloomed from within. She had reclaimed herself. One evening, in the privacy of their chambers at Grafton Wood House, Travis revealed everything to his wife. They sat before the fire, the room warm with amber light and the intimacy of 2 souls who had weathered storms together. He spread before her the evidence of his campaign, letters carefully worded, connections strategically employed, each move designed with surgical precision. "The delayed shipments," he explained, his voice quiet, "required 3 conversations with harbour officials who owed me favours. The investors withdrew because I privately demonstrated the instability of Jordan Ventures, not through lies, but through truths they had been too comfortable to examine." Gisela listened, her eyes never leaving his face as he catalogued each quiet blow struck in her honour. "The workers," Travis continued, "needed only opportunity and fair wages to choose dignity over degradation. I did not steal them. I simply offered them what they deserved and what the Jordans had long denied." "And Parliament?" she asked softly. His smile held no triumph, only certainty. "Parliament respects power demonstrated through restraint. They saw a man defending his wife without breaking a single law, without raising his voice, without descending into the very cruelty he opposed. That, my love, is a language they understand." Gisela reached for his hands, studying the face she loved. This man who had moved mountains without ever appearing to strain, who had dismantled an empire while maintaining perfect civility. She saw love not merely spoken in poetry and promises, but enacted through protection and purpose. Love that built schools for children whose parents had been dismissed as worthless. Love that taught humility to the proud while preserving their capacity for redemption. Love that changed systems rather than merely soothing symptoms. "You did all this," she whispered, wonder threading through her words. "For me. I would do infinitely more." He brought her hands to his lips, his kiss a vow renewed. "Your dignity is not negotiable, Gisela. Not to society, not to titled fools, not to anyone who believes your worth is determined by where you began rather than who you are." Tears gathered in her eyes, not from sorrow but from the overwhelming recognition of being seen, being valued, being protected by someone who possessed the power to reshape the world and chose to use it in her name. She moved into his arms, settling against his chest where his heart beat steady and sure beneath her ear. The fire crackled. The world beyond their chamber continued its endless dance of scandal and spectacle. But here, in this moment, only truth existed. "I belong," Gisela whispered against his collar, the words she had long feared to claim finally finding voice. "Not because you made me a duchess, not because society now accepts me, but because you loved me enough to show me my own worth." Travis's arms tightened around her, his lips pressing against her hair. "You always belonged, my love. I merely ensured the world recognized what I knew from the first moment I saw you, that grace, dignity and worth have nothing to do with titles, and everything to do with the heart that carries them." Spring arrived in London with the promise of renewal, and I, Lady Whistledown, found myself chronicling not scandal, but redemption, a far rarer commodity in our glittering world of silk and secrets. The Jordans, once brought to their knees, had risen again. But they rose different. Spencer Jordan's estates, though diminished, operated now with integrity rather than exploitation. The arrogance that had once defined his house had been tempered by consequence into something approaching wisdom. He attended Parliament not to demand favours, but to contribute genuinely to discussions of reform. His name, once synonymous with pride, began to carry whispers of changed man and humbled nobility. I observed him at a charity function, speaking quietly with merchants he once would have dismissed without a glance. His face still bore the lines carved by his fall, but there was peace there too, the peace that comes from accepting one's failures and choosing growth over bitterness. And Levi, our young Levi, who had learned his lessons in coal dust and forge fire. He completed his sentence at Graftonwood with a transformation so complete that even I, cynical chronicler that I am, found myself moved. The boy who had mocked a duchess and spilled wine upon her gown emerged from those 6 months as a man who understood that nobility of spirit mattered more than nobility of birth. I watched him thank the very workers he had once scorned, clasping their hands with genuine respect, learning their names and the names of their children. He returned to his father's house, not as the spoiled heir who had departed, but as someone who had finally earned the right to his station through character, rather than accident of birth. The Jordans rebuilt their house upon humility, a foundation far more stable than arrogance had ever provided. But the Duke of Graftonwood's influence extended far beyond a single family's reformation. Workers across the realm prospered under the reforms Travis had quietly championed. The £50,000 from the Jordans had seeded schools where common children learned trades and letters. Apprenticeships flourished, offering pathways to dignity for those previously trapped in generational poverty. Other nobles, witnessing the transformation, began to follow suit, some from genuine compassion, others from the calculated understanding that the Duke's favour was worth courting. But the motivation mattered less than the result. Conditions improved, wages rose, respect became less rare between classes. Justice, it seemed, could wear a compassionate heartbeat. Travis never claimed credit for these changes. He moved through London as he always had, elegant, understated, directing power with such subtlety that many never realized the currents they swam in bore his influence. But those who paid attention, who traced the threads of reform back to their source, understood what he had built. Not merely vengeance against those who wronged his wife, but systematic change that honoured her, and all like her, by proving that worth existed independent of station. And Gisela? Oh, gentle listener, she became everything her detractors had feared and more than they could have imagined. A duchess adored by society, yes. Invitations to her salons still sparkled like gold dust. Her fashion choices set trends. Her opinion carried weight in matters both trivial and profound. But more than that, she became a symbol of possibility itself. Proof that grace could be cultivated rather than inherited, that dignity resided in character rather than bloodline, that love could elevate without diminishing. Young women of common birth looked to her and dared to dream. Noble ladies of ancient houses found their prejudices challenged by her undeniable excellence. She moved through London not as someone who had been given a place, but as someone who had earned one and transformed it in the process. A woman vindicated, a love securely crowned. On the anniversary of that fateful night, 1 year since wine had stained silk and insults had flown like arrows, the Duke and Duchess of Graftonwood hosted an evening at their London residence. The same faces that had witnessed her humiliation now gathered to celebrate her triumph. I positioned myself where I could observe it all, the glittering ballroom, the guests who now competed for Gisela's attention, the subtle dance of power and grace that defined every interaction. But the moment that stopped my chronicler's heart came late in the evening, when Travis drew his wife onto the terrace beneath stars that seemed to shine with particular brilliance. The music from inside floated soft and distant. Candlelight flickered in crystal holders, painting golden light across marble balustrades. London spread below them like a jewelled tapestry, unaware of the vow being renewed above its glittering expanse. Travis took Gisela's hands in his expression holding that particular tenderness reserved only for her, the look that had first captivated me about their story. The proof that true love existed even in our cynical world. 1 year, he said softly. 1 year since the night that changed everything. Changed us, she corrected gently. Revealed us, he countered with a smile. You were always extraordinary, my love. I merely ensured the world could no longer pretend otherwise. Gisela's eyes shimmered with tears that caught starlight like diamonds. You remade the world for me. I remade nothing. He brought her hands to his lips, his kiss a seal upon the promise he spoke next. Your dignity will always be my greatest crusade. Not because you require my defense, but because defending you, honoring you, protecting you, ensuring the world recognizes your worth, gives my power purpose. You are my North Star, Gisela. Every decision, every reform, every quiet battle fought in shadows, all of it finds meaning in you. She kissed him then, soft and sure, a kiss that tasted of triumph and tenderness intertwined. Tell me, dear reader, in the face of insult, would you choose mercy or justice? London whispers still of that night, the night wine was spilled and a duchess was mocked, the night a duke was called too merciful to defend his wife. They whisper of how his silence spoke louder than any sword, how his patience proved more devastating than rage, how love, true, devoted, unshakable love, corrected folly with unbreakable grace. And I, Lady Whistledown, have borne witness to it all. If this tale pleased you, subscribe for more scandal and romance. Share below. I do so love reading your thoughts. Yours in ink and intrigue, Lady Whistledown.